Bridgerton is so back. I've been watching the show since it first came out, and I loved the first two seasons. Kate and Anthony will always be my favorite. And season 3, it was there. I didn't like season 3 so much so that it actually made me very apprehensive to watch this current season with Benedict and Sophie, even though I've always enjoyed Benedict's character arc. But I'm glad I finally did watch it because I'm really enjoying it. And Sophie's situation in particular got my English language linguistics brain cells firing. If you aren't aware, Bridgerton is a Netflix original series that began in the 2020s based off of the Julia Quinn novels, and it follows the Bridgerton family as they navigate the high society Regency era London and also their search for romance. But the show is not just about love, at least that is what its showrunner Chris Van Dusen says. He says, quote, "We want modern audiences to relate to the story and to see themselves on screen. The show thrives in the space of being relatable to whoever's watching, no matter who you are." And the show certainly hits the mark on visual representation for leads in particular in a way that is refreshing to witness. But what about representation through other forms? I've seen Bridgerton all the way through several times now, and something that I've noticed repeatedly is the distinct ways in which it uses accent variation. There is a link between the standardness of how one sounds and their social status. And as someone who's always been interested in language and sociolinguistics, I have a few questions that I want to answer with you all today. The first question is, how does accent help establish a social hierarchy in Bridgerton? The second is, how does this impact the show's claims of diversity? And the third and final question is, what can this say about how film and television in general tend to view representation? But before we dive into answering those questions specifically, I do want to take a quick look at some of the most widely used accents across the UK and how they have historically been perceived, just so we all have a little bit more knowledge and context before we go into Bridgerton. Like many countries today, the UK is home to a plethora of different accents that all have a distinct sound. Two of the most widely spoken British accents are received pronunciation, which is also referred to as Standard British English, and that is spoken across the whole region. And they also have the Cockney accent, which seems to be centralized in and around London. Received pronunciation, or Standard English, is spoken by the royal family, many public news and broadcasting outlets like the BBC, and it is the accent that is traditionally taught in public schools. Its inflections have historically been associated with the middle and upper classes in the UK, and this is also probably the accent you first think of when you think about British speech and what it might sound like. The Cockney accent has a vast history too, as it was created out of working class London around the 1800s. Some defining characteristics of this accent include its use of rhyming slang and also its TH sound fronting pronunciation, which basically means that the TH sound in words is often pronounced like f, like the F letter, or V, like the V letter. The Cockney accent has been the most popular lower and working class accent in London for a while now, and it is the one that is primarily used to differentiate between the social statuses throughout Bridgerton. But I do think it's interesting to note that a new mode of speech is forming throughout London as a result of the uptick in immigration in recent years, which has diversified families and friendship groups in the area, thus altering the way that those people speak. It is currently called Multicultural London English, or MLE, and it seems to be mostly rooted in Caribbean, South Asian, and West African influences. Some interesting characteristics of MLE are its usage of man as a first-person singular pronoun. So, for example, instead of saying he went home, someone would say man went home. Sometimes man can even be used in place of the second-person pronoun you. So instead of asking where are you going, you can ask where is man going. Another grammatical feature that is unique to MLE is its transformation of the British slang term in it from a tag question, which for example would just be "it's a scary movie in it," to a tool that helps to invoke new information in a conversation. So an example of that would be, "I saw your cousin at the store yesterday. She's graduating soon in it." The person that would be asking this question is hoping to learn more about this cousin and their schooling. Both Cockney and MLE are perceived quite differently than Standard English is, just in general. Whether consciously or subconsciously, many people associate the two with a lower or less than status. These accents and others that vary from Standard British English don't face as rigid of a bias as they did back way in the Regency era of London, like when Bridgerton is, but many people still feel the ramifications of those historically developed stereotypes to this day. For an example, the BBC posted an article last January exploring what they call UK's hierarchy of accents and how that affects young people today within London and across the UK. The story opens interviewing a student named Beth from Sandwell and how the way people make fun of and judge the way she speaks makes her feel self-conscious and isolated in her university classes. She recalls students coming up to her and telling her that she, quote, must be intimidated by them and how they speak because they were previously educated in a private school while Beth was not. She came from an area where private schools were not as accessible or the norm. Because of these instances, Beth stopped speaking up as much in the classroom, concerned that no one would take what she had to say seriously because of the way she sounded, and that they would, quote, perceive her as stupid. Beth's struggles are one of many that highlight the prejudices still prevalent in UK society related to accent biases. These assumptions made about how one sounds usually draw from racism and classism, and the consequences of looking down upon certain accents, dialects, or languages are concerning, often leading to those who speak outside of their area's standard to hide their accent in order to be taken seriously at work, at school, and other social situations to avoid potential discrimination. But adjusting how you speak doesn't exist in an isolated vacuum. Language is how so many people connect to and preserve their culture and heritage. In the case of MLE, it is how people blend their history with their present as a way to connect with others and to create new culture through coming together and honoring our variation. It would be a shame, I think, if we all sounded the same. I'm not so sure if Bridgerton feels the same way I do about accent variation. Let's discuss what I've noticed throughout the show, how accents help establish its social hierarchy, and the implications of this choice. I've picked out several characters whose relationship with their voices caught my attention the most, starting with Simon. Now, I want to start off with Simon, otherwise known as the Duke of Hastings, and I know that his accent doesn't really stand out amongst the town.
That is what I was hoping to discuss. I've only returned to London to deal with my late father's affairs. I'm afraid it leaves me no time to socialize.
It's pretty standard, and it sounds like how we would expect it to be given his position of power. But I do want to talk about him as a small but still linguistically related aside. In the first episode of the very first season, we learn that Simon had a stutter as a child. He eventually grows out of it, so it doesn't impact how he's perceived by others as an adult outside of his family, but it does impact the relationship dynamic he has with his father, aka the social hierarchy within his own family. Simon's father was desperate to have a son in order to pass on his legacy and his title. He was obsessed so much so that he doesn't even notice his wife dying as she gives birth to Simon, because he is so focused on the discovery that Simon is the boy that he's always wanted, or so he thinks. He leaves the room as she is bleeding out, elated to parade around Simon to the house staff. Quickly though, he realizes that Simon is not this perfect golden child he has projected onto him since before he was even born. One of the first scenes we get of Simon as a child is of him stuttering as he tries to speak to his father.
Give me a word, a grunt. No.
His father responds saying, quote, "We have been granted this line. The monarchy itself has declared it, but it will only remain ours so long as we remain extraordinary. The Hastings name cannot land in the quivering hands of a half-wit. Get him out of my sight. This boy is dead to me." So for Simon, this stutter is the outward expression of his deeply rooted conflict between himself and his father in terms of the pressure his father puts on him to step into this role of dukedom with ease and perfection that is unrealistic and virtually unattainable, nor should it be required in the first place. It makes Simon feel inadequate and less than growing up, knowing that his father is ashamed of him because he's not performing his role the way that he is expected to. Even later on, when Lady Danbury takes Simon under his wing and works on his speech, he still finds himself stumbling over words or stammering in front of his father, showcasing how much power his father still holds over him. No matter how correct he tries to be, it's not enough for his father to end his judgment and his cruelty. In the second episode of season 1, we see a flashback of Simon visiting his father on his deathbed. His final words to his father are a callback to all those previous years of abuse. He says, quote, "The Hastings line will die with me. Are my words clear enough for you, father? Speak, you monster, speak." Simon's reaction to his stutter facilitates this desire to go against social norms as a coping mechanism. At this present point, Simon seems determined to reject participating in traditions that reinforce the town's social hierarchy because of the ramifications of his father's status obsession. Of course, later on, he does show up to several balls and promenades with Daphne, but that is only because he's using his fake courtship of her to keep a distance from the other mothers and daughters that desire him solely because of his title as the Duke. Daphne doesn't really care about his social status in terms of wanting to marry him because of it. Her family is well connected enough that she doesn't have to care so much about marrying up. She didn't even know who he was when they first bumped into each other at the beginning of the season, even though everyone else seemed to know all about him. As Simon's father is sick and dying, he loses his ability to speak. He loses his grip of power to shout nasty things toward his son. These final words from Simon, "Speak, you monster, speak," become even more assertive in that context. It is empowering for him to finally become dominant over his father in this aspect. Someone who mistreated and abandoned him for most of his childhood. Commanding his father to speak when they both know that he can't is Simon's way of embarrassing and belittling him over his voice in a similar way that he did to Simon for so long. The lingering silence at the end of the scene also makes what Simon says even more potent. And I do believe that the way that Simon's father treats him is horrible and inexcusable, but I do want to provide a little more context as to why his father might feel such pressure for them to embody the role of the Duke to such high esteem. Lady Danbury makes a comment to Simon sometime in the first season about how King George's marriage to Queen Charlotte was instrumental in desegregating London, thus giving people of color like Lady Danbury and Simon's father the ability to achieve titles and social statuses greater than previously imagined for themselves. I think with this knowledge and also his father's comment about how the monarchy declared their dukedom, it makes sense that Simon's father takes that declaration seriously. We do not know much about the Hastings past, but I can only assume that they were not living as lavishly as they do now in this first season and onward. Although Simon is born into a world where diversity is the norm, his father did not. This certainly impacts the expectations he has for his son, because we all know, especially now, history is not always linear. It can take twists and turns, and it can even feel as though it's going backwards at some points. Simon's father needs his son to be extraordinary, in his words, in order to ensure that they're doing everything that they can to keep their title, because when you've lived without, it is hard to shake that scarcity. Another character that understands the differences between living with and without a title is Will Mondrich, and I would like to discuss him next. next. A large part of Will's character arc is about moving up in status and dealing with receiving those monetary and social benefits. At the beginning of the show, he and his family do not have the same means that the Bridgertons or the Duke do. He starts as a boxer with people betting on his ability or inability to win matches, but that's not what he wants to do his whole life, and that's not how he wants to continue providing for his family. We can see a peek inside his home shortly after Simon and Daphne marry. It's certainly not a mansion. Everything is smushed together and contained to a couple of gray rooms, and yet his accent does not reflect that closer association to the working class in the way that we might expect it to. And I believe that is for a reason. When we see Will's circumstances externally as a fighter who lives in a huddled home, we come to understand him in a certain way. But when we listen to his voice, we can hear his true hopes and aspirations of creating a better life for his family, which he believes can happen best through social mobility.
Still on that dance floor with Miss Bridgerton. How is she? She's to marry, and you are free to do as you please.
It's clear from the quick-to-judge, scandal-fueled nature of this town that you can't just come upon a bunch of money and be rich. That's it, end of story. You have to really embody that role of whatever noble title you have. One way to do that is by sounding like the nobility, by changing your voice to assimilate into the standard in order to be better respected. And Will badly wants to be respected by those with titles. That is why he ends up throwing a boxing match to favor Lord Featherington. He uses the money paid from the match to open up a gentleman's club where every man regardless of rank is welcome, building a place to give other people like him opportunities that he didn't have. And his desire for respect also leads him to eventually give up his club toward the end of season 3. Many members of the town think it looks bad that Will is still a working man, even after his son claimed a distant family member's inheritance and title, thus boosting them into nobility. But back to the boxing match. Lord Featherington tries to provoke Will into agreeing to stage the fight by saying, quote, "You are a performer, a mere entertainment. We are happy to trade wages on the outcome of your fists, but no gentleman will ever see you as a respectable man of the business." He throws it in Will's face that one of the only reasons he even has contacts with the nobility is because they enjoy making money off of him. It is quite objectifying. If we relate this back to the harm that comes with accent stereotypes, it makes sense why Will speaks with more of a standard British English in the show. His voice is a way that he is able to humanize himself and establish a sense of dignity around all of these other men who do not view him the same way they view each other. And also, all of these wealthy men are profiting off of a black man's ability to be aggressive and strong, which historically plays into some other harmful stereotypes pertaining to black masculinity. And it also plays a role here in how trapped and weak Will feels in this moment and how he thinks people above him in society view him. He has far less control over the way that these people perceive him externally and physically, but he can change the way that he sounds. After the fight, he speaks with Simon, whom he is more friendly with, and Simon tells Will that he would have helped him out financially if he knew that he was struggling. Will takes offense to this, saying, "I don't need your charity. Whatever could be more honorable than taking care of one's family, doing what needs to be done." Of course, this is just a personal theory of mine as to the origins of Will's voice. Throughout the show, he doesn't really have any conversations that involve code switching. He never speaks in a different way. You could argue that his conversations with Simon prove that this is just how he sounds since they are friends. However, Simon is still the Duke, a title that holds a lot of power and influence, as we have just discussed previously. Even in the scene after the boxing match I just mentioned, Will refers to Simon as "Your Grace," a proper term of addressing throughout the interaction. I hesitate to believe that Simon's status doesn't impact the way Will presents himself to and interacts with him despite the nature of their relationship, especially because Will is so motivated by respect. No matter how close they are, there is an inherent power imbalance there. Will Mondrich isn't the only character who changes how he speaks in order to gain respect from the town. Madame Delacroix does as well. She runs a dress shop in the area and fakes a French accent in order to seem like a more alluring choice to the London nobility to purchase their dresses from. In reality, she is an English commoner with a Cockney or working class accent. She sounds more akin to the likes of the Featheringtons' house staff than to the Featheringtons themselves.
Hello? The shop has closed? Bloody hell, say. You're scared by my wits.
What? I use the back entrance as you asked.
A few people in town do know that Madame Delacroix's accent is fake. In the first season of the show, a character named Marina Thompson, a distant relative of the Featheringtons who is visiting, uses this secret to her advantage. At first, Delacroix denies making Marina's wedding dress because of the Featheringtons' unpaid outstanding balance. Marina snaps back and says, "That reminds me, you have such a unique accent, and yet I never asked where in France you are from." And then in fluent French, she continues saying, "My mother was French, you see, and I'm not fooled by your little act. I would hate for the other ladies of the town to learn that they have been taken in as well." It is important to the Featheringtons and Lady Featherington specifically that Delacroix makes Marina's dress for her wedding with Colin Bridgerton because of the esteemed association to the best dressmaker in town, alongside marrying a Bridgerton who also has a lot of social connections. So socially, Marina's marriage will give her own daughters a leg up when it comes time for them to marry. And it also absolves them of the possibility of Marina's secret pregnancy out of wedlock becoming a huge scandal that negatively impacts their reputation. That, on top of the gambling debt that Mr. Featherington is racking up, would socially ruin them. They have a lot going on. So Marina levels with Madame Delacroix by threatening to reveal something about her that would put her at equal risk of reputational and financial ruin, revealing her fake accent and her true London working class origin. But why does everyone seem to care so much about a French accent? What difference does it really make? A big difference, apparently, in terms of social perception, back in the Regency era and also now. When we first think of French accent stereotypes, we probably first think of words like snooty and pretentious. And those do sound like they're veering negatively, but they're just a concentration of how people perceive French-sounding speech. That more extreme pretentious association comes about because of how many people believe the French language and accent to be a marker of sophistication and cultural taste. This is in large part because of how much the Western world has come to see France, and Paris especially, as a hub for the arts, for cuisine, and for fashion. With this context, it becomes clearer why Madame Delacroix chose a fake French accent specifically, and why many people in the town in Bridgerton react to it as such. Paris's reputation of being the city of high fashion spans back from today all the way to around the Regency era where the show's set. It's pretty obvious that a lot of the mothers and daughters in the town are obsessed with appearing desirable, and Delacroix is using that to her advantage. Her fake accent is a marketing tool to create this atmosphere of luxury and attraction, so that people will be more likely to purchase her dresses, thus making her more money. She might not necessarily be moving super far up the social hierarchy because of this, but within her realm, she still receives many social and financial benefits from her popularity and positive reputation. Another young woman learns of Madame Delacroix's real voice through faking an accent of her own. We see Penelope Featherington/Bridgerton, depending on the season, using an Irish accent several times throughout the second season of the show in particular.
I only mean Colin has been keeping me informed of his adventures in Greece. He's certainly no Lady Whistledown. £11, 2 shillings here altogether. My mistress is willing to take an even 10. You get to keep the surplus for your rapid service. These kind of delays are sure to be more frequent now due to an unforeseen circumstance anyway, so...
Penelope speaks in an Irish accent to help conceal her identity whenever she's dropping off her latest edition of Lady Whistledown to be printed. It is a similar situation to Madame Delacroix, but for reversed effects. Delacroix wants people to hold her in higher esteem, to trick others into thinking she is of lower status than she actually is. Both Penelope and Delacroix change their accents as a way to help their businesses thrive. They also end up working together to keep their ventures afloat. Delacroix helps deliver Whistledowns to the printing press, and in exchange, Penelope sneaks positive comments about her dress shop into the writing, since she has so much influence. And once she knows she's trustworthy, Delacroix drops her fake French accent around Penelope, as they are no longer so siphoned off by class. Rather, their relationship is united in its ambition for their respective work, whether Delacroix thinks Penelope actually needs the money to survive like she does or not. And again, why does an Irish accent matter so much? Ireland and Britain have a tumultuous history, to say the least. I'm not going to go too much into detail here because someone could make an entire video on that, and I'm sure people have. Not me though, because I'm definitely not a historian, so I'll just give you a brief overview from what I've understand from the little bit of research I've done. For a long time, Ireland was a dependent territory of England, and then it became a dependent territory of Britain for a while after that. And before all of this, Ireland was its own self-governing kingdom, but you know how the British like to colonize. There were a ton of conflicts during the time that Ireland was under the wing of Britain. At the hands of the British, many Irish people experienced religious suppression, the suppression of their Gaelic language and culture, and the creation of this narrative that native Irish people were undesirable and savage. This all came to a head during the Irish Revolution of 1798, in which the Irish people were inspired by the US and French revolutions. Several years later, the UK and Ireland became established as supposedly one independent sovereign state, instead of a state and an occupied territory. And then some more things happened after that, but not for a while, and this ending of Ireland as a British territory and beginning of it as a sovereign state happened around the time that the Regency era was just beginning. But the impacts of years of suppression, attempted ethnic erasure, and stereotypes don't just disappear out of the minds and social culture of the British or Irish citizens with one declaration. Its impacts are still felt even today. During Bridgerton's time period, there was still very much an anti-Irish attitude present, especially among those of higher class rank. Speaking in Gaelic or even an Irish accent is proof that the Irish were persevering and the British were not, in this respect of conquering and claiming Ireland as their own. The Irish people living in London surely felt the ramifications of this taken out on them, and Penelope, a woman of nobility, uses all of this tension and poor attitude against the Irish to her advantage by disguising herself as one with her voice in order to fuel the upper class's petty gossip and also to make money off of it. And the actress who plays Penelope is Irish, I will acknowledge, so maybe they just choose for her to use her native accent instead of learning another one to distinguish Penelope from Lady Whistledown's maid. I would hate to think that a show as big as Bridgerton wouldn't consider any of this history when they're coming up with storylines and narratives, though. It would come off as careless to me. But regardless of their intentions or no intentions, Penelope's choice to speak with an Irish accent does help establish the social order of the show, because it plays into a lot of the perception of the Irish people that come about because of Ireland's and Britain's deep history. And of course, I couldn't talk about accents and social hierarchy in Bridgerton without mentioning the maids, the footmen, and the butlers. I noticed that the house staff really doesn't speak much during the scenes that they're present in throughout the first few seasons of the show. It is really in this latest season, season 4, that we get a peek into their world. But before we jump ahead too far, there is one observation I made during my rewatch of seasons 1 and 2 in particular that I want to discuss. It seems as though the nobility's social statuses correlate with the strength of their respective house staff's accents. In the first few seasons, we notice this phenomenon in particular between the Bridgerton and Featherington households. Violet Bridgerton's head of help, Mrs. Wilson, sounds quite similar to Violet and her children, but when we listen to Lady Featherington's head of help, Mrs. Varley, speak, we notice a much greater distinction between herself and Portia, Lady Featherington.
Well, every baron has a bastard.
Navy linens on a small table. So... Oh, dear. Where the
devil is that going?
Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Varley's accents stay consistent no matter who they're talking to. Even though the Bridgertons and the Featheringtons are both part of the upper echelon, the Bridgertons are still socially perceived to be above them by the rest of the town. Their house staff reflect that in their voices. It's almost like a hierarchy within a hierarchy. We see the continuation of this distinction through season 4 as well, now that we get a closer look inside the maids' quarters of various households in the town. The Bridgerton household still has the most standard sounding maids and butlers and footmen, as exemplified with conversations including Mrs. Wilson, John the footman, and other housemaids.
It is me, after I marry a well-to-do gentleman.
I've seen a lady coming and going, but no man of the house.
Perhaps she is a well-to-do mistress.
Mistresses do not live in this neighbourhood, Celia. The Tom would not like to associate with a house of that kind.
After noticing this, I took a quick look at the ranking of social titles. They are in order from highest to lowest: Duke, Marquess, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, and Baron. The Featheringtons are barons and the Bridgertons are just above them as viscounts. So they are higher in title technically, but with the way that the Bridgerton family is discussed among the town, I would have assumed they were farther up on the list. However, title alone is not the only aspect to consider when it comes to social power during this time. The Bridgertons are still regarded quite well, more so than even some families of higher rank, because their family line is very old and established, meaning that they have had a long time to cultivate a lot of good social connections, hence their relationship with the Queen, and also a really big fortune. Just because you have a certain title doesn't mean you're rich. A lot of people with titles are in debt throughout the show, as shown with the Featheringtons. And above all else, money and influence talk louder than the rank in front of your name. So this is the reason why the Bridgerton family is able to afford such a large house with many high quality sounding staff. The way the house staff speak also reveals a lot of information about one of the newest Bridgerton characters, Sophie Baek. Sophie works as a maid for the Penwood family, but she doesn't sound like the other staff there, whose working class accents are even thicker than Mrs. Varley's at times.
French embroidery thread on Duchess satin. It was perfect.
Left them in the room upstairs. Alfie, run and get them.
You go, I will finish. I know how to sew.
This helps to distinguish the Penwood family as viewed as socially lower than someone like the Bridgertons, even though they do technically have a higher title name. But it's also used to distinguish Sophie from the other staff in the house, since she is one of the main leads of the show, and also because her character's background is not the same as theirs. Although in the current day, someone's accent should never predetermine their intelligence or education level, in this show, we have seen numerous times how closely the way someone speaks is related to their relationship with social status and power. And regardless of the time period, it is a lot easier to have access to resources like a quality education when you have the money to pay for it. Sophie is treated as a maid by her stepmother because of her prejudice against her for being illegitimate, as Sophie's mother was a maid who became her father's mistress. Her father, however, did have title and rank as the Earl of Penwood. Thus, Sophie should be closer to that similar social standing through blood relation, while her stepmother, Emerita, only receives that status and fortune through marriage. This is another reason why Emerita despises Sophie. She technically has more of a right to the Earl of Penwood's estate than her own daughters do. And she knows this, alongside Sophie's beauty and brains would have suitors flocking and taking attention away from her girls, thus taking away a lot of her girls' ability to also move up in terms of social status through their marriages, respectively. While her father was still alive, Sophie was brought up learning alongside of her stepsisters, receiving an education that far exceeded what any traditional maid or house staff typically would. In fact, Sophie's intelligence is so well-rounded that even Eloise Bridgerton is impressed by her knowledge of books and language once she begins working for their family.
It is about Marie Saleh.
She is famed for inventing her own steps. She was quite a pioneer of dance. I have read the book.
Oh, have you read Ennui?
Yes, though I prefer when she writes from the feminine perspective.
A point well made.
She visually presents as a maid, but when we hear her speak with many of them, her voice is out of place. When Sophie speaks to someone like Eloise or another nobility, they are surprised because she appears working class but sounds almost like them. Aside from her mask, Sophie's voice is another big reason why she is able to sneak into the Bridgerton's ball in the first episode of season 4 and meet Benedict. If she were to sound like Mrs. Varley or the others from the Penwood staff, she would surely stick out and draw attention to herself, probably getting caught in the process. Or she might not have even thought that she was able to go to the ball at all, and thus she wouldn't have even been there, the season wouldn't have even really happened this way. And if she sounded working class, it wouldn't have taken Benedict nearly so long to figure out her true identity apart from the other girls in the town. Visually, her job as a maid makes her socially invisible to Benedict when she is Sophie the maid. And when she is this mysterious woman at a ball, her voice also makes her nearly indistinguishable from other girls in the town to Benedict, which is maybe part of the reason why he had such a hard time finding her when he was looking for that lady with a glove. He didn't have much visually to rely on, and he didn't have much in terms of a voice to rely on. Depending on the social context, Sophie's voice allows her to separate herself or to blend in seamlessly. There is also another family in Bridgerton whose daughters seem to cause quite a stir amongst the town. Kate and Edwina Sharma's voices also reflect their struggles with assimilating into the prestigious attitudes of the London nobility. But I do want to focus primarily on Kate today, although I'll touch on Edwina a little bit throughout. Her stepmother, Lady Mary, is originally from the London town, but married Kate's father, a commoner below her class rank, and moved to India with him to become a family. This stirred up a lot of drama back home for Lady Mary years ago when it happened, and that drama resurfaces itself during Kate's season. Kate is determined to secure the perfect husband for her younger sister Edwina. She has specific standards which we later learn are a result of Lady Mary's parents' wishes that I'll talk about in just a moment. The nobility of the town still haven't forgotten about her stepmother's scandal. When the Sharmas arrive at their first ball, people have a lot of gossip to spread about them, saying, quote, "Lady Mary's parents never lived down the shame, did they? Too ashamed to show their faces in London." After her husband died, Lady Mary had a hard time supporting her family on her own. We learned that in order for them to be taken care of financially and for Edwina to receive a dowry for her marriage, she is required by Lady Mary's parents to marry an Englishman of nobility, and that is why they have returned to London from India. Kate first reveals this information to Lady Danbury, confiding into her and saying, quote, "I spent the last 8 years raising my sister to walk in the right way, to talk in the right way, to play the piano just so, teaching her twice as much and watching her work twice as hard as anyone else." Kate literally says she has to teach her sister how to talk the right way, meaning she had to show Edwina exactly what to say and how to say it in a way that gets her taken seriously and considered seriously during this marriage season. And it does work. Edwina gets chosen by the Queen as the diamond of the season. She is polite, she knows how to engage with potential suitors and other nobility of the town, and she knows exactly how to sound like the nobility her grandparents wish for her to become through marriage. Throughout their entire season, Kate and Edwina speak like they have been living in Regency-era London their entire lives, despite having hardly left India.
A true pleasure, Lady Danbury. I am so grateful for your hospitality. Your home, it is magnificent.
I do hope I did not keep you waiting long. The gardens here are so lovely. After such a lengthy journey, I found that I wanted some freshness and morning air.
I'm actually not even sure if they've ever left India. It's kind of murky, but they've barely left India if they have. That is, of course, apart from the few times they refer to themselves as Bon and Didi, Bengali terms of endearment for sister and older sister. Of course, Lady Mary grew up in London, and I'm sure partly being raised by her has influenced their accents to an extent. But Lady Mary isn't Kate's mother. Both of Kate's parents are native to India, where Kate had been born and educated and grew up to the point of the second season. It really makes no sense for her, or really Edwina for that matter, to sound as properly British as she does, unless something else is going on here. Perhaps she is choosing to speak this way on purpose and is helping Edwina do the same as a means to make the process of finding Edwina a distinguished, noble husband her grandparents want to go as smoothly as possible, and also to ensure that her stepmother, the only living family left that truly accepts her as kin, is taken care of as she gets older. So maybe it's not really so much of a choice. It's kind of forced upon them by people who cling onto certain societal standards. Unfortunately, I believe that if Kate and Edwina had walked into that first ball, that one where everyone was already gossiping about them, and started introducing themselves with a non-standard kind of accent, or even just simply using those phrases Bon and Dee amongst themselves in front of others, they surely would have become socially outcasted instead of just the topic of conversation. They were already othered because of the nature of their backstory, of Lady Mary's backstory. They would have become further isolated. Kate, as the older sister, is aware enough of this to take measures to protect her sister and her family. Hence what she's saying here as she confides in Lady Danbury. Similar to Will Mondrich, she cannot control what people think or say about her past, but she can ensure that her and her sister attend the right events, wear the proper kind of dress, and speak in a manner that allows them to blend in with those of higher rank. So what is Bridgerton claiming to do in general with Kate and Edwina's characters in terms of the claims of diversity that they parade around in regards to their show? Netflix says this, quote, "During the Regency period, there were nearly 50,000 South Asians residing in the United Kingdom, so the Sharma storyline echoes a real-life history with significant cultural meaning. Genre and period pieces have been used as an excuse to keep a cast predominantly white for a really long time. Shonda Rhimes says she wanted Bridgerton's world to feel as three-dimensional as possible, for putting those often marginalized heroines front and center in the Regency era. It is still believable because guess what? We did exist during this time. It's not like we just emerged all of a sudden. It just shows that not only is it possible, but it makes a show richer, more vibrant, and more interesting." End quote. What Netflix is talking about here is specifically about the Sharmas, but I think the heart of this sentiment made can extend itself to many of the characters of color the show includes. And I do agree with what's being said here fundamentally, as in, we need to see and celebrate more stories from non-white perspective in film, in television, and art in general. But I'm not sure that Bridgerton fulfills this claim to the extent that it could, or that it thinks it does, because it seems to think that three-dimensional, richer, and more vibrant storytelling begins and ends with visual appearance. And I believe that diversity shouldn't be reduced down to simply visual representation. I think it would have less of a problem with how Bridgerton uses accents to establish social order if they were not so forward with how they want audiences to perceive the show as almost revolutionary in terms of diversity. And don't get me wrong, visual representation is important, and I think that the show does that well in many ways. Not just in terms of people of color, but also including people with physical disabilities as well, like the introduction of the character Hazel in this latest season. But I do fear that Bridgerton reveals a problem that film and TV as a whole struggles with, which is assuming visual variance is enough, that adding more skin tones to a show is the only way to make it more diverse. It is a start, but it shouldn't be where we stop. People deserve to see themselves and to hear themselves on screen. This is an important aspect of diversity to consider today, especially with the rise in language variations like multicultural English, which I talked about in the beginning in the UK. I think when we talk a lot about representation, we focus on how it impacts children specifically. For good reason. Kids deserve to be able to grow up interacting with media that reflects their experiences, the way they look and the way they speak. But you never age out of that desire to notice someone like you on screen, especially if you didn't get to have that experience as a child. And many of us didn't. Shows for adults, shows like Bridgerton, can continue to develop and fine-tune the role that they play in creating a space for a holistic view of representation by considering the impact of the way that they use or don't use their characters' voices, alongside how they appear. Accent, dialect, and even entire language stereotypes still exist, and people still have to deal with the real-life consequences of it, as we discussed with Penelope and her Irish accent, even Madame Delacroix with her French accent, and of course, all the way back to Beth in that BBC article about the UK's accent hierarchy. And I do understand that at the end of the day, this is a fictional show about rich people doing rich people things. There has to be some kind of signifier of class distinction, maybe in how they dress? I don't know, but speaking of how these characters dress, there are so many historical inaccuracies riddled throughout Bridgerton that maybe they can just get away with not having a significant class distinction. They seem to be getting away with a lot of other things, so. And that is another thing that I don't get about this show's claim of diversity. Why would you choose a point in history with such a rigid social hierarchy and deep financial disparity to begin with to want to feel represented in? Is this really what making progress is? Seeing people of color flaunt massive displays of wealth while others are starving in the streets instead of white people doing it? Regardless of who is filthy rich, people are still being mistreated and dehumanized on the other side. Maybe as a white person myself, I might not be the one to speak on that. It might not be my conversation to start. Or maybe at the end of the day, this is just a show and it doesn't have to be that deep, but I feel like in a lot of ways, it does have to be that deep, especially when the show itself is making claims that it should be that deep. Nonetheless, I am still going to continue to watch Bridgerton. Overall, I do enjoy the show. I find it entertaining despite the critiques I make of it, and I'm not making this video to say Bridgerton is evil, Bridgerton is bad, we shouldn't watch it. I just noticed something that I thought would be interesting to share and see if other people had noticed it too. And I would prefer having something to say about it than finding it so unengaging that there's nothing to say about it at all. I think a good show does get you talking, and people, myself included, always have much to say about Bridgerton and its many aspects. Maybe I'll get back to you in 20,000 years when the next season drops to talk about that one too. That's another thing people like to talk about with Netflix originals in general, is how long we allow them to take nowadays to make like 8 episodes of a show, but I'm veering somewhere else. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know and I'll be happy to make more in a similar style alongside my baking book club series, where I read books and I review them, and we also bake desserts that usually thematically go along with the book as well, while I discuss my observations of the book. Let me know your thoughts. I always love to hear them. I will say I have been thinking about making a video comparing how heated rivalry, the show and the book, handles dominance and submission in relationships versus how Wuthering Heights does in the recent film and also the book, because Wuthering Heights and heated rivalry versus each other handled them differently, but I know also within the Wuthering Heights universe, the book versus the Emerald Fennell film also handles them quite differently. I haven't seen the new film yet, but I've watched a couple reviews of it, and yikes. But that means if I make the video, I'd have to go and watch the new film, and I really don't know if I can emotionally put myself through that torture, because I do love the book so much. That was my first baking book club book that I read, so check that out if you want to. I might do it. I can muster up the strength to do it if you all are interested in it, because I do think that's an interesting topic to discuss. I also am currently starting to just read the heated rivalry books, so stay tuned for a baking book club of those in the coming weeks as well, hopefully. That's all I have to say for now. See you all soon. Goodbye.